Why is Europe turning away from American gas just when the US invested billions to supply it? This isn't just a policy shift. It could trigger the next energy crisis, shake up global markets, and affect everything from electricity bills in Berlin to fertilizer prices in Bihar. The American LNG boom was born out of crisis. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Europe scrambled to cut its dependence on Moscow's gas. Within months, American LNG, liquefied natural gas, became Europe's lifeline. Contracts were signed, terminals were built, and over $120 billion was invested to ensure that the US would become Europe's #1 energy partner. But now, Europe is pulling back, and fast. In April 2025, Germany, the EU's biggest economy, declared that it would not sign any new long-term gas deals beyond 2030, not with Russia, not with Qatar, and, most surprisingly, not even with the United States. The message was blunt. Gas is not our future, said Germany's energy minister. Instead, Berlin is betting everything on renewables, electrification, and nuclear revival. This wasn't just a German decision. It sent shockwaves through Washington and Wall Street. The stock of Cheniere Energy, the largest U.S. LNG exporter, fell 7% overnight. Several billion-dollar LNG projects, like Venture Global's Plaquemines Phase 2 and next decade's Rio Grande expansion, were suddenly under threat. Why? Because their future depended heavily on Europe, and now Europe's long-term commitment is in question. See, LNG terminals and supply chains aren't cheap. They need decades-long contracts to break even. But a recent S&P Global report revealed a problem. Only 38% of US-Europe LNG deals are firm, long-term agreements. The rest are flexible, subject to cancellation, renegotiation, or resale. They can be turned off like a tap, especially when politics change. And politics are definitely changing. Across the Atlantic, President Donald Trump's return has added a new layer of volatility. His decision in February 2025 to pause new LNG export approvals shocked Europe. Ostensibly, it was for environmental review, but Brussels read it differently, as a warning that US energy policy can shift dramatically, depending on who's in power. One senior EU official put it plainly: "We can't build our energy future on a country whose export policy changes every 4 years." This growing mistrust isn't theoretical. It's already shifting investment decisions. France is leading the charge. President Macron has announced 14 new nuclear reactors, a total ban on new LNG infrastructure beyond 2035, and an ambitious plan to electrify all home heating systems by 2030. French energy giant Total Energies has already walked away from multiple post-2030 gas deals with US suppliers. Spain is following suit. In March 2025, Madrid froze new LNG infrastructure beyond 2026 and redirected funds toward green hydrogen and utility-scale solar. Spanish utility Naturgy, once a reliable buyer of US LNG, is now dumping surplus gas on the spot market rather than locking into long-term deals. This isn't just about climate goals. It's about energy sovereignty. For Europe, reducing dependence on fossil fuels isn't just environmental, it's geopolitical. First, it wanted to break free from Russian gas. Now, it doesn't want to swap one dependency for another. That includes the United States. The EU's internal memos now reflect a sharp pivot. An April 2025 document viewed by Politico Europe revealed that Brussels wants all new gas contracts to be short-term and flexible, with exit options after 2030. US exporters, on the other hand, want the opposite: long-term security. The result? A growing disconnect. While US LNG developers are building infrastructure to last 20-30 years, Europe is planning to phase gas out completely within a decade. This isn't a small mismatch, it's a strategic divergence. Meanwhile, Russia hasn't disappeared. In fact, despite sanctions, Russian LNG exports to Europe rose 36% in the first quarter of 2025. Tanker-based shipments remain legal, even if pipelines are sanctioned. And new tactics are helping Russia mask origin. Gas is being relabeled, rerouted, and resold via Asian middlemen. Even Gazprom, once Europe's villain, is quietly re-entering the game. Through shadow resale platforms in Asia, Russian gas is finding its way back into European markets. No flags, no labels, just molecules. And while Europe hesitates, China is capitalizing. Since January 2025, Beijing has signed over $40 billion in LNG supply deals, many running into the 2040s. China is co-investing in Qatar's North Field, Arctic LNG 2 in Russia, and projects in Mozambique and Nigeria. Chinese companies are snapping up long-term contracts originally meant for Europe. Several cargoes from U.S. terminals that were supposed to dock in Rotterdam have instead landed in Tianjin. This is not a coincidence. It's strategy. China understands that cheap, secure gas today will mean stronger economic growth tomorrow. And while the West argues over net zero timelines, Beijing is locking in its energy future. As of May 2025, China has overtaken Europe as the world's top LNG importer, for the first time since the Ukraine war began. For U.S. gas exporters, this is an existential challenge. They built their business on the assumption that Europe would need gas well into the 2040s. Now, those assumptions look shaky. Asia is an option, but it's already crowded. China has long-term deals with Qatar and Russia. Japan and Korea are reviving nuclear. India prefers cheap, flexible spot deals. There simply aren't enough stable buyers to justify all the new U.S. export capacity. Industry analysts now warn of a potential LNG glut by 2028. If new supply keeps rising while demand peaks or collapses, prices will crash. That would be disastrous for not just American exporters, but also new suppliers in Africa and Latin America. Australia has issued a quiet warning. If the U.S. overbuilds, we all pay the price. This isn't just about contracts, it's about energy strategy. The transatlantic bond, forged during the Ukraine crisis, is fraying. The U.S. wants stable buyers for its growing gas surplus. Europe wants freedom from fossil fuel dependence altogether. What makes it more complex is the timeline mismatch. U.S. supply is set to keep growing through 2030. European demand could peak as early as 2026. That gap is widening, and with each passing month, the rift grows. Make no mistake, Europe isn't acting irrationally. It is responding to energy security, climate goals, and political pressure. But its decisions carry consequences far beyond its borders. If U.S. terminals sit idle, if investment dries up, or if an LNG glut sparks a price war, the entire global gas market could destabilize. It's ironic. Just 3 years ago, American gas was seen as Europe's savior. Now it's being quietly sidelined, even as China grabs the opportunity. For the U.S., the question is no longer, how much gas can we export? The real question is, who's left to buy it? With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.